Hello once again everyone and welcome back to another video. So, what am I doing today? You might ask? So this is based on two types of videos that I have done recently, okay? So first off, there are just like the general vlogs that I've done, but the other thing are the kind of semi-dramatic readings of that story that I wrote while I was in high school. And I thought it'd be interesting to kind of look at an older work that I did and kind of rewrite it. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to present the old work. So without further ado, here we go. Ilth. There was once a boy who lived in a large town in 18th century America. He was a child of an old politician and his charmingly young wife. The boy grew up in a very large house and experienced all the pleasures of money. For the majority of his childhood, he was happy. That was until the pleasures of money began to bore him. At the age of 14, the boy decided that he had grown tired of the rich life. During his morning bath, the boy snuck away from his house and went into the city. Fearing that he would be discovered if he were too reckless, he felt that it would be best if he lived among the poor. For 2 weeks, he begged for money on the city streets. This grew tiresome for him. The boy was in an unfortunate circumstance. He wanted the pleasures of money without all the consequences that come with it. He decided that the life of the poor was not enough for him. After 2 weeks of hot summer days with little to eat, he left. He decided that he would find a job. Unfortunately, most businessmen weren't eager to hire a poor beggar. After 3 weeks of searching, the boy had grown desperate. "If I don't get the life that I want, then I will end my life right now!" he yelled to the night sky. "If it's a favor that you ask, I am the one to see," rang the voice of an old woman. The boy was startled by what he saw. Before his eyes was a witch. He had seen these ladies in fairy tales, but he never thought that they would exist in reality. Fearing that he may suffer the same fate as Hansel and Gretel, the boy tried to run. The witch grabbed his hand before he could make a clean escape. "Do not fear me, boy. I merely seek to give you what you want," she said with a sly grin. "You can give me the life that I truly desire?" the boy asked. "Sure I can. I just need you to sign a contract with the blood of your right thumb." The boy doubted the witch at first, but decided to make a deal with her, against his better judgment. The witch removed a large scroll from her sleeve and began to write in an unknown language. Once she was finished, she asked the boy to sign at the bottom. The boy complied. "Now the deal is made," the witch began. "I hope that you truly desired what you are about to receive." The witch made a sinister laugh and faded into the shadows. The boy was nervous, but he was also excited to start his new life. Almost instantaneously, the boy fell asleep. He awoke to find himself in the body of a grown man. He was no longer in the city, but in a giant forest. Confused, the young man decided that he would try to find civilization. After searching for hours, he came up with nothing. There was not a single human to be found. Not even a small house in the woods could warm his welcome. Why was there no one to be found? Did he make a mistake with his deal? After 3 weeks of isolation, the man found the figure of another person. He immediately ran towards it. Once the figure noticed the presence of the man, it turned around. The figure was not human at all. It was a troll. This was not the typical troll that one pictures from fairy tales. This was instead a more civilized one. From the rear, any human would mistake it as one of their own. The face is what gave it away. With pointed teeth sticking out of its mouth and pure black eyes, it was a truly terrifying sight. These trolls did have one thing in common with their traditional fairy tale counterparts. They loved to eat humans. Excited at the sight of a new meal, this troll began to run towards the man at a frightening speed. Frightened, the man began to run. For 2 hours, the troll chased the man throughout the woods in hopes of eating him. After growing bored of the chase, the troll gave up and went about its business. This was not the last time that the man would deal with trolls, however. In the course of a month, the man would encounter giants, ogres, and vicious wolves in the forest. Over time, the man began to get used to them. He became less afraid of the monsters that he encountered. He learned to defend himself against them. Using ingenuity, he crafted his own axe from the elements of the forest. He became known as the Feral Axeman among the creatures. Soon, none of the creatures bothered to attack him. They knew that it would mean certain death. The man became at peace in the woods. He knew that no one would harm him. However, he still had not felt the comfort of another human being in several years. He was now 40 years old. He bared a scar in his right eye from a wolf's claw. For the first time in years, he began to search for civilization again, but it never came. The man was now 80 years old. He had become weak and timid. Were it not for the legendary axe that he carried, the creatures would have devoured him years ago. Frustrated, he cried out into the night sky, "Witch, why have you betrayed me? Why have you not given me what I asked?" He howled into the sky. "I simply gave you what you asked for," the witch replied, appearing from the shadows. "You did not. I spent years searching for fellow human beings. It's almost as if they do not exist," he barked. The witch stared into his eyes. She had no look of pity or remorse. Her eyes were cold and piercing. She began to laugh uncontrollably. This angered the man. For the first time in years, he lifted his axe, ready to kill. "You desired the pleasures of wealth without its consequences. The reason that you haven't found that world yet is because it simply does not exist. There cannot be a light without a dark. You foolish man, you have spent years looking for fiction," the witch said. "What were those words that you wrote on the scroll?" "The rules were very simple. He who signs his name here will be judged. If what the signer truly desires is just, nothing will happen. If what the signer desires is greedy or foolish, they will be taken to the land of Ilth, where they will live the rest of their days in misery and isolation." "Can I go back?" "No. Your axe will return once you have died. It will be discarded, later to be discovered and placed in a museum. Your flesh, however, will stay here forever." Before the man could ask another question, the witch had vanished. He refused to believe what the witch had told him. He continued to search for civilization. Just like the witch said, he never found it. The man died on a tiring quest for a civilization that did not exist. The corpse of the man became food for the ogres. Not a single drop was left of him. The axe returned to Earth, where it was hidden in the deepest depths, never to be found again. So what did you think of that? So for reference, I wrote that I believe the date that it was last modified was April 20th, 2014. I was but a lad of 18 years old. So I wrote it during a time that's actually pretty similar to now, where like I was in a position where I felt like at the time I didn't really have a whole lot of agency. Like things were just being like made and chosen for me, and I was just forced to kind of respond to them rather than kind of just like exercising my own agency and making decisions based on what I thought was best for me. And I wrote that all in one sitting, I believe. I decided I'm going to go ahead and rewrite it. But plot twist, this is actually the second time that I'm doing this video, because actually I recorded a whole other video yesterday. But I'm going to go ahead and redo it because the rewrite that I did in the long lost video, like it wasn't the same story. Like I just changed too much about it, and I felt like I kind of defeated the purpose of it. So what I'm doing this time is I'm going to try to stay true to the original story as much as possible. I'm going to change the motivations and a few things here and there, but I'm going to try to retell the story. I don't write a whole lot of prose anymore, right? If for those of you who are unfamiliar with me, my current series, the Nobunaga universe, links available in the description. That's a screenplay, or as I've recently been calling, a booklet play series. And that's like my preferred style these days. This time I'm going to try to use a slightly more modern style of writing, which is probably going to make it sound less like a fairy tale and more just like a dark fantasy, but that's okay, because the purpose of this isn't to try to, imagine what 18-year-old me would have written had they had the knowledge and skills that I have now. It's to see how Mia today would go about taking on
the story that I wrote when I was 18, if that makes sense. Without further ado, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and outline the story, because back then I didn't outline things, and you can tell the ending was very rushed, and so we're going to try to work through an outline to see what we can do to kind of, make the story more coherent. So I'll be right back. Okay, so I have just finished writing my outline. That took a lot longer to write than I thought it would. You would think that because this is a story that was pre-written, it would be easy, but no. I made a lot of changes. This one's still a lot truer to form than the original. But yeah, I did make several changes. First of all, like, I gave him an actual name, and I chose a specific location here, because in the original, I said that it was 18th century United States, but really, I wasn't really picturing the US when I wrote it. I don't think I was picturing kind of like vaguely like Western European country. So now I chose New York. Just because that would help me better visualize. I thought having a specific location actually during this time period is important because he comes from a rich family, and depending on where he is, it's entirely possible that his family would be involved in certain institutions of slavery that I'm not all that interested in exploring in my short dark story. But anyway, without further ado, it's time to write this thing. Lego. Okay, so it is actually a new day. I'm re-recording this part because I had initially recorded this part right after I had just finished writing, and I was tired after having spent like several hours writing, and I just didn't feel like talking, so the part wasn't very good, so now we're redoing it. So anyway, without further ado, let's go ahead and go to the completed story.
Ilth. You are to do as you are told. Young Tobias heard this all his life. He grew up in a household that valued order and discipline. His father was an officer in the American Revolution. He believed that now in times of peace, it was even more important that society produce well-disciplined leaders to guide this young country to prosperity. Every day of Tobias's life was structured. He woke up at 5 a.m. sharp. He exercised until breakfast at 7:30. Then it was time for his lessons, privately taught and very expensive. Next was an early dinner, and then immediately it was time for his drills. His father would teach him all that he knew about formations, weapon maintenance, and psychological warfare. Supper was at 6 p.m., not a minute earlier, and never a minute later. From there, he would have his evening bath. At 8 p.m., it was time for bed. He would sleep and do it all over again. Tobias did this 7 days a week without exception. He had no time for play, and he had no time for friends. The few children his age in his life were fellow sons of officers, and they were at best friendly rivals. In a few years, a new academy would be founded, a so-called West Point. Tobias would be one of the first to attend. He would graduate and serve his country to the best of his ability. From there, he would become a powerful politician. He would have children of his own, and the cycle would continue. That is what was expected of him, at least. Tobias, however, had other plans. He grew tired of the monotony of training. He wanted to be his own person and chase his own dreams. He ran away from home at 16 with nothing but the clothes on his back and a little money for food. He went to the city where he believed he would find work. New York City in 1799 was a budding city. The population had doubled in only a few short years, but its infrastructure was not yet prepared to handle so many people. It was overcrowded and full of disease. The water especially was filthy. There were plans to draw the city's water from a new clean source, but it would still be a few years before it was finished. Tobias took a drink of the city's water and fell deathly ill. With barely any money to support himself, he was forced to nurse himself on the streets, all the while avoiding his father's men. Tobias's father knew that New York City would be the most likely spot to find him, and he sent men on the regular to bring him back home. This made it impossible for Tobias to find work. He couldn't stay in one place for too long, lest he was reported to his father's men. Tired, weak, and extremely hungry, Tobias considered ending it all. It was clear to him that this world was not for him. He would either die in the streets as himself, or return home and live a long life, dying as someone else. He stared into the murky city waters. His nostrils flared from the horrible stench. Though he had been in the city for a few weeks already, he believed that he would never get used to the smell. He put his first foot into the feces-littered water. He thought it was only fitting that he would drown in dung. This was where someone like him belonged. But then, he felt a gentle tug on his sleeve. This startled him. He turned to find a sad old woman standing next to him. "Leave me be," he said. "No," she said, "I will not. Please, this is how it must be. Let me die on my own terms." "Why die on your own terms when you can live on them instead?" The old lady handed Tobias some money. "You may have no future here," she said, "but there's still life for you, Tobias. Take this and leave the city. Start a new life. Be your own man." "Who are you? Why do you know my name?" The old woman smiled. "Don't look a gift horse in the mouth," she said. Then she left. Tobias was confused, but he was thankful for the old lady. He took the money and hired a stagecoach. He would get as far away from the city as he could. He didn't know where he would end up, but he would be free of his father's influence. That's all that he needed. He left late that night. The ride was bumpy, and he had no room for himself. The stagecoach was filled to the brim with other passengers. Still, he managed to fall asleep. He woke early the next morning. To his surprise, all the other passengers were gone, and the stagecoach had come to a complete stop. He looked outside and saw that the driver and the horses were gone. Tobias was confused, but also, he was beginning to get scared. Had he been abandoned? He found himself in a windy cliffside road. It was the perfect vantage point. From there, he could see everything. There were trees and trees for miles. There were no signs of any settlements or any signs of humans. Tobias had no idea where everyone went, but he figured that they couldn't have gotten far. He hiked along the road, hoping to find his group. Around midday, he saw someone in the distance. It was a man walking in the same direction. Tobias was ecstatic. At last, another person! He called out to the man. There was something off about this man, however. He didn't yell back or show any form of hospitality. He just sprinted at Tobias at full speed. Tobias thought it odd, but he figured that the man was also lost and, much like him, he was excited to see another person. As the man got closer, however, it was clear that he was more than just a little off. It was hard to tell from further away, but at this distance, he looked to be nearly twice Tobias's height. He had broad shoulders, and his long, slender arms draped down below his knees. His fingernails were razor sharp, as were his teeth. This thing was not human. It was human-shaped, but it was definitely not human, and it looked hostile. Tobias ran away in fear. This only made the beast chase even faster, its predator instincts kicking in. With its superior height, it caught up to Tobias with ease. He could feel the pus of air from the beast's nostrils. Droplets of mucus and saliva coated Tobias's neck in a dewy mist. Tobias tripped and rolled down the hill. Just before the beast could bite into his neck, he tumbled and tumbled until he crashed into a tree. He felt something warm and oily dripping from his head. It was his blood. It began to pool in his left eye, partially blinding him. He tried crawling away from the beast. It was a futile effort. The beast was already quicker than him at a full sprint. At a crawl, he would be easy pickings. Blood began to pool in his other eye. He was now crawling completely blind. He could hear the beast's footsteps. He could hear its breath. Tobias continued to crawl as fast as he could. The terrain was coarse. His nails filed away until his fingers were a bloody mess. His consciousness was fading. He was losing a lot of blood, and he undoubtedly had a concussion. He lay on the ground, accepting his fate. It was unfortunate that he chose to live, only to die. But this was how it must be. He drifted off into what he thought was oblivion. But his end didn't come. He awoke hours later. His face was covered in dirt and dry, caked blood. He rubbed his eyes. The beast was nowhere to be found. He had no time to celebrate. He needed to figure out how to get out of this situation. He examined himself as best as he could. His right arm was broken, and likely so were a few of his ribs. He was still a bit woozy from his concussion. He gathered some sticks and tore a bit of his clothing to make a tourniquet for his arm. Then, he built himself a small fire to keep himself warm. His father taught him how to survive in the wilderness, as there was always a chance that during a deployment, those skills could mean life and death. He found it ironic how thankful he was for that. He rested well. Tomorrow would be a new day, and he would need to continue his mission to find other people. Unfortunately, there was no one to be found. He searched and searched, but to no avail. Days turned to weeks, and weeks turned into months. His bones healed, albeit somewhat incorrectly. He had given up on trying to find people. He believed it best to make the most of what he had. So, he worked to build himself a small log cabin. In time, he learned the lay of the land. It was full of strange, formidable beasts. But they all had a pattern, and it was only a matter of time before he would learn them all. Time continued to pass, and Tobias was now an old man. He lay in his deathbed, reflecting on his life. What did he do to get here? And was it possible to go back? It had been decades since he left New York City. What does it look like now? He could hardly imagine. As he lay in wonder, an old woman appeared before him. It was the same old woman that saved him years ago. Her expression was cold and uncaring. He assumed that this was an illusion. She was an old woman when he was a young man, and now that he himself was old, she would be long gone. You look at me as if I am an illusion, but I assure you that I am real, she said. This startled Tobias, but it was clear on his face that the old man was terrified. The old woman cackled. After all these years, you still have no clue where you are, she said. How are you still alive? He asked. Time is not an obstacle for an immortal like myself. My name is Esmeralda, the deity of this land. You still owe me your soul. Tobias was shocked to hear this. I devoured the souls of everyone else in that stagecoach, but for you, I chose to wait. I saw such delicious despair in your soul, and it would only season with age. Now that you are at death's door, it is time for me to feast. Tobias could only watch as the old woman approached him, ready to consume him. Then another woman appeared before Tobias. This woman looked identical to Esmeralda in every way, but she looked warm and inviting. Do not stop me, Edith, Esmeralda said. His soul is my right. Edith invoked something in an elder tongue. Esmeralda screamed in pain. Very well. Keep him. I have other souls to eat, Esmeralda said. Esmeralda vanished before Tobias's eyes. Edith approached Tobias. Do not worry, she said. Esmeralda no longer has dominion over you. You can rest now. She placed a coin in Tobias's chest. Live on your own terms, she said. Tobias drifted off to sleep. He awoke in a stagecoach. Young again, but tired and achy. The stagecoach was full of other people after all. He hardly had room to sleep comfortably. The stagecoach had stopped at an inn, miles away from New York City. He would rest there for the night before continuing his journey. Tobias wondered if what he experienced was just a dream. It all felt so real. He reached into his pocket for his handkerchief, but there was something else in there. It was solid and round. Startled, he pulled it out of his pocket. His face lit up when he saw it. It was the same coin that Edith had placed on his chest only moments earlier. Tobias smiled. Thank you, he said to himself. Tobias exited the stagecoach. He was unsure of where it would take him next, but be it Providence or Philadelphia, he was ready. The end.
So, what did you think of that? Honestly, I thought it was a very interesting experience. I do my booklet plays too much, so the prose wasn't very eloquent, very clean. It was pretty rough in certain parts, Granted, you know, a lot of this has to do with the fact that this was a story that I wrote in a couple hours and I just did like minimal editing to. This were an actual story that I was actually trying to write and like get out there like now from scratch as an adult. I would definitely do a bit more editing. Like this would just be like, this is just a good first draft. For a fun little experiment, I thought that it was serviceable. The ending for the final product is different from the ending that I had initially wrote in my outline, because I thought the original ending was a little bit too dark. And it's not that I never write dark endings, but like usually I tend to like at most go for something that's a little bit more on the bittersweet side. And for this one, because Tobias is, in my opinion, a lot more sympathetic of a character, especially when we got to the part where like, you know, he was on the lake and he was considering like, or like the river, he's considering like dumping into it. Like I thought that having him survive only just to like die in this dark, bitter way afterwards, it just broke the whole spirit of that whole interaction they had. That ending just didn't jive with me, so like I changed it. And I had to do a bit of research beforehand. Like I didn't do like super extensive research, but like, you know, I wanted to like see what New York was like. I do think the ending was a little bit on the rush side. The rewrite was definitely a premise, I think, for something much larger, but because it was a short story and I wanted to keep it to a relatively similar length to the original, it's nearly twice as long, but still. So like I kind of just like cut some stuff out and just like, okay, here we go. Anyway, this was a fun experiment. Definitely if any of you guys out there have any stories yourself have written, I'd recommend making a video like this and maybe we can start a trend or something, I don't know. Let me know what you thought. Let me know if you want me to do this again, because there are a couple other stories I could do this with. It was a fun idea, so I wouldn't mind it. And without further ado, yeah, see ya!